Welcome to the Two Marketing Moms podcast. I'm Kelly Callahan Poe, and today's episode is called The Life Brief with Bonnie Wan. Bonnie is the best-selling author of The Life Brief and a celebrated brand strategist turned life strategist. She has been named Ad Chief Strategy of the Year, as well as an advertising icon. Bonnie's Life Brief talks and workshops have been featured at Apple, Airbnb, Google, Goop, South by Southwest, and many more. She's a married, breadwinning mom of 4 kids and loves sleeping under the stars. Welcome, Bonnie.
Oh my gosh, Kelly, thanks for having me.
Well, I have to tell you, as soon as the book came out, what month did it come out this year?
January
Okay.
16th.
So as soon as I saw it, I hit my hand on the table and I was like, why did I not think of that? Because, after having been in advertising and marketing for 30 years and doing what you do in terms of writing creative briefs, it had never occurred to me to take the idea of a creative brief and translate it to a personal life brief. And so I have so many questions. So let's first talk about what is a life brief in broad strokes.
Yeah, so for industry insiders, the easiest way to explain it is writing a creative brief for your life. And for those who are not in the marketing world, creative briefs help us distill to the essence of our ambitions about who we are. It's single-minded, written often on a single page, distilling a company's DNA. Who are they? And what do they want as their ambition in terms of where they're going? And it's all distilled and crystallized into a sharp, sticky strategy that drives action. And that's really key to creative briefs, right? That they propel you into seeing a wider expanse of possibility. Creative briefs are designed to generate ideas for innovation, for creativity, for expression, but they anchor you in what matters most so that we don't get off brief, as we call it in the industry,
Yeah.
which you know, right? And the life brief has the same effect. It gets you to the essence in a sharp and sticky way of what do you want in any part of your life. You can aim it at any part of your life, but what matters most here? And what do you want? And how do you express it in a way that is sharp, sticky, and action driving? And what I mean by sharp means it's so clear. What I mean by sticky is that it's tattooed into your heart and onto your mind so you never forget it, almost like a tagline. And it's action driving because that's the most important part when it comes to creating change. It shifts how you show up, even in the smallest ways, in the most important parts of your life.
I love that. So in the industry, a creative brief for us is always about finding that one insight about the target audiences that's going to make them take some sort of desired action. And frequently it is close to possible sometimes to get it in a one pager. And a lot of times we're talking recently about, can we get it in one sentence? But really that's the brief that we use to give to the creative team so they can manifest the creative ideas to make that key message come to life, right?
That's right.
So I that's why I love what we do. That's to me the most fun part of problem solving in the advertising world. So what was your motivation to take the creative brief concept from advertising and turn it into a life brief?
Well, it was a moment of despair, really. I had already been a strategist for 20 plus years of my life, and I hit a giant speed bump in my marriage.
Wow.
It was 2010, and I had 3 kids. I have 4 now, as you said, but I had 3 kids under the age of 5. And I was the single breadwinner, though my husband was trying to start a business. So it wasn't that he was at that time the stay-at-home or lead parent, as we call it now.
Yeah.
And I was exhausted. Young kids, no sleep. And we were negotiating schedules. We were picking each other apart. Who's doing more? Who's doing what? Uh, where could we get better? We were just, raw. And I felt bitter. I felt like I was holding an unfair share of the load. and I wanted help. And I did, you know, in hindsight now, I see all the ways that I was overly critical, exhausted. But in that moment, it was just a fury of frustration. And at my lowest point, I could see the path leading to separation, divorce, all the things we know as a society. And as a reflex and act of desperation, I went to my strategist mind and I said, okay, let's break this out. And strategists use questions to penetrate and stir up new answers or new data points. And
Yeah.
so I applied that to myself with the question, what do I really, really want here? Not what do my parents want for me or my best friends, not what does my husband expect or even what my children need. I had to drop into a deeper place, more raw and nakedly honest place about myself. And I started there. And very quickly, a bunch of stuff vomited out onto the page. I was
Yeah.
just writing because as a strategist, I collect data through writing. And what appeared was a new story. And here's what I've learned in teaching the practice and writing the book is that we all walk around with stories in our heads, maybe in our hearts, about how the world works.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, those stories are full of limitations. They hold us back, they make us play small, they force us to hide, or they've been handed to us from people we love to protect us, but they keep us in this safe little bubble. And for me, the story that was on loop in my head at that time was my marriage is broken. I married the wrong person. My husband is to blame for all my troubles.
Yeah.
Feel silly now in hindsight. But the story that came out on the page was no, no, no. What's broken is my relationship with time. I was spending and spilling my time in ways that didn't matter to me. Some of it was sleepwalking out of habit. A lot of it was people pleasing. I was saying yes to all kinds of things that I should have been saying no to. And as soon as I had that insight, my brain immediately shifted instantly to how do I solve that problem?
Yeah.
How do I reimagine my relationship with time? And so I wrote to get clear about if I could reimagine, restructure my time, what would that look like? Where would I invest it instead of spilling it? And out came my first life brief, which was called Take Our Time, which meant be more intentional with it. Take back control over it, and to slow the heck down.
And that's a good lesson there. Well, I'd love to give some of my own input as well, but before we kind of go back and forth on that, you divided the book into three different parts and three different, in essence, strategies. Can you go through those strategies? And then I'd love to talk about, I think you call this, it's a book full of exercises, and some may work for some people and some may not work for others. And so people kind of need to pick and choose. I'd love to hear broadly the way you've structured the book and the different categories, and then kind of dig into some of the specific tactics that you suggest.
Yeah. So the arc, the practice overall is exactly inspired and modeled after what we do as strategists in marketing. It's three simple parts. Get messy so that you can get clear, and then you can get active. But a lot of times in our culture, especially business culture, we have a bias for action. So we skip over messy and clear to just drive action. And that is
It's true.
another definition of insanity because we need to slow down to speed up. We say this all the time in business and we say this to our clients. Let's slow down. Let's examine all the ingredients. That's what Get Messy is. Let's collect all the data. Let's do the research. Let's drop in and peel back the onion so that we can get really clear and get to the essence of what we really want and what matters most. And once you do that, action is a byproduct of that clarity. Action becomes organic. You start to see new ideas, new possibilities. But if you drive straight to action, oftentimes you'll just be chasing your tail. So get messy. And in the book, the hardest part about writing it was giving people lots of different ways to get messy because not everyone is the same. So you had made the observation, wow, it's a long process. And it's not so long in that it's not expecting everyone to do every exercise. But I wanted to create a toolbox because as a strategist, I have a pretty wide tool set.
Yeah.
And every time I'm faced with a new client or new category, I'm pulling different things from that toolkit. And so in the book, Get Messy, part one is filling it with a toolbox. Some will resonate with some people and others will resonate with others. And that's what it's meant to be. But getting clear is really about taking all the ingredients you've generated and looking at them with curiosity and then meeting them with that naked honesty and setting aside what is meaningless or meaning light or neutral and zeroing in on the stuff that is sacred, non-negotiable, gives you goosebumps. And that's the pile of stuff. That's the juicy stuff where you start to write your clarity brief.
I love that. Well, can we break that down a little bit and talk
Sure.
first a little bit about getting messy? Because that's kind of where I'm still in the getting messy phase. And your core question is what do you really, really want? And I think most of us don't sit down and ask that question. And, for me, one of the things that you asked is talk about that also in relationship to your own personal fears. So you
Mm.
can state what you want, but what is holding you back? So I can say I really, really want XYZ, but maybe I don't have the money to do it, for example.
Yes. So, what do you want? It was the simplest question because as a strategist, we're using all sorts of questions to penetrate, right? And not all questions are created equal.
Yeah.
Some are so big and vast. What's your purpose? That is just one that stumps everyone. But what do you want is deceivingly simple because it's familiar. You get asked that, when it's your birthday, when it's the holidays, when you want to go on vacation. But what I do is I take something that's really familiar to people and then I start dropping in layers that take them deeper. It's not just what do you want in terms of what do you feel like, but it's what do you really want, Kelly? And in your heart of hearts, when you look at this part of your life, whatever's gripping you, could be a relationship, it could be your career, it could be a cause, it could be yourself, which a lot of us women ignore. In your heart of hearts, what do you really want that maybe you haven't allowed yourself to admit yet?
That's the part that really got me is there's definitely things where that you have in your head that you don't think about all the time that you weren't ready to admit or to surface yet. And I think getting that down on paper is a huge part of the process. So in that get messy stage, can you just give a couple of the exercises or tactics that might help do that best?
Yes, I'm going to talk about the first two chapters because each chapter, and they're so short, right? I try to make them as bite sized as possible because I know we're living in these busy traps. We're on 24/7. So, how do I make this so digestible, easy, accessible, and hopefully irresistible in some chapters? But the first chapter, the exercise that comes after at the end of it isn't an exercise at all because it's not at all about doing, it's more about being, which is one of the hardest things in our culture today. It's about creating pause and dropping in to yourself, creating quiet. That's what it's really about. How do you sit in the quiet? And I'm talking about increments of time of 5 minutes,
Yeah.
10 minutes. And that's the starting practice. And I call it a practice because it gets easier the more you do it, but I am inviting frequency, not quantity of time, but frequency, so that you're really starting to drop out of your head and into something deeper. The second chapter is about creating a practice of a daily brain dump, which is a timed writing exercise, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. If you can't do 5 minutes, do 3 minutes. My invitation is always to break it down into the easiest increment where it's a duh. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, I have to do that. And that is the practice of giving yourself that naked permission to allow whatever is coming up from deep within you to come out of and onto the page without editing, without judgment, without withholding. That in itself is a cathartic experience. It can also be challenging if we're afraid of our thoughts, if we're afraid of our feelings. And that simple daily practice, and I invite people to try it for a week, 2 weeks. I'm not talking about years or months, because as an advertising strategist, my job is to get further faster, right? It isn't coaching, it isn't therapy. It's about how do we uncover the truths quickly. Um, and so the daily brain dump gets us into the practice of being in relationship with ourselves, not editing ourselves, not um, having our inner judge or inner critic rule. And so it's messy because this is part one, get messy,
Yeah.
because we're just allowing all the stuff to come out.
So are you
As
writing
then,
sentences? Are you writing words? Are you writing feelings? Are you writing thoughts? Is it all the things that you just want to get out of your head before you go to sleep? And what can you give there's no guardrails, right?
there's no rules, no guardrails, and that's part of the practice. You're practicing being your own compass and allowing yourself um, to examine, are you asking, am I doing this right? Is this what Bonnie intended? And the invitation is off road from that need to know whether it's right or wrong, or what grade would you get if you showed this to someone. This is
Sure.
about a practice of self-directedness, you creating the rules, you doing what you feel and what you need, honoring your needs in that given moment, which we're out of practice. I think, everyone I know is out of practice with that.
I think that's absolutely true, especially in just giving yourself the time, right? Because we're so scheduled. Every day is so scheduled, and we don't schedule enough time for ourselves.
Yes, I'm working on a kids brand right now, from
Are
my
you?
brand strategy agency lens. And I'm looking at the data around how stressed kids are, how overscheduled they are, how pressured they feel to grow up at younger ages. So if they're feeling it, we're definitely feeling it, and we're probably the source of it without even being conscious of it.
There were two tactics that I thought interesting that I haven't touched yet. One is pen your eulogy. Um,
Mm.
and the other one is know your magic. And I think we know that in an intuitive level, but you suggest another way of going about it in terms of asking your friends, your people that don't know each other, and you start to see themes coming out of that. Could you talk a little bit about those two tactics?
Yes, penning your eulogy is an exercise of writing your own eulogy. Imagining, it's a bit morbid, but imagining at the end of your life what your friends, families, colleagues are going to say about you. And it's an exercise that we use when it comes to branding. We ask people in focus groups, what if this brand went away and died? What would you write for its eulogy? And it's a way to uncover what role did this brand play in people's lives? What made it special? And in this case, for the life brief, it's what do you want to be remembered for?
Yeah.
What would you like your legacy to be. And, Bronnie Ware is a palliative nurse who wrote, it kind of was viral across the internet many years ago about the 5 regrets of
Yeah.
people who are dying, right? And the number one regret, I hope I don't butcher it, is about I wish I'd lived a life of my own making
Yeah.
and not one that others had prescribed for me. And the exercise really is helping you begin at the end, meaning at the end of your life. Let's look at what you want your legacy to be, and then let's wind back to how are you living up to that today? Does that mean you have to live every minute, in service of your legacy? No. But if we look at the broad brushstrokes of your life, what are you doing in service of that legacy? Where could you shift some of your choices? On the flip side, what is your magic? What makes you you? Sometimes we need somebody else's outer perspective to help us get clear because we're jumbled and confused and we're in the trenches of our own lives. But when we ask people who are invested in our growth, who really care for us, some simple questions like, what makes me me? Who am I? What do you experience of me when I'm at peak me, meaning the best of me, when I'm, high on who I am? What do you notice? And what kind of situations activate that? And on the other side, what drains me? When
Yeah.
do you see me, kind of depleted, deflated at my worst? What's happening there? And when we collect that data, we're looking for patterns. As you said, what do people say that's shared from different parts of our lives? And that just gives us perspective.
Well, let's move on to getting clear. So this is to me the essence of what of the whole thing in terms of declaring what you want and the 5 declarations. Can you explain how do you get to that point, and then how do you make it sticky and keep going and keep, just like you iterate a brief, you're working on that key message. How do you continue to make it stronger, make it stronger?
Yes. So if in getting messy, you've collected your ingredients through writing, and writing's really key
Yeah.
because when we write, we create distance between our emotions and the content. And so you can step away from the writing knowing that it's parked and come back to it with curiosity instead of with fear. And so the writing means it's there, you can give it space, you can come back to it. And when you've collected some ingredients over the course of a couple of weeks, you start to see your own patterns,
Yeah.
or you start to see some ahas, like I did in that very first brief. No, it's not about my husband being the problem. But when I spill and spend my time, I'm left empty. I have nothing left to give. And then I'm a raging blank, and that isn't great for our relationship. And that turned me to notice where I'm accountable for what was happening in our marriage at that time. So the writing allowed me that distance. I could look at it from a different view instead of the repeating story in my head. He's the problem. He's the problem. Our marriage is broken. Oh no. Oh no. Instead, I looked at the page and I could see, no, I got to shift how we're spending our time, how I'm working, how we're living. And 4 months later, we had really transformed our life after writing that first brief. And getting clear starts with looking at those ingredients from a distance with curiosity. And like I said earlier, sorting them. Oh, seeing what's drama, distractions, noise of the moment, moods of the moment, and separating that from the stuff that fires you up, lights you up, gives you goosebumps or butterflies because it's tapping something that you really, really want. And you can't imagine at the end of your life not getting it, right?
Yeah.
And those are 2 different buckets of things. And then there's homework, housekeeping, things that you have to show up for, right? And those are just neutral. Let's stop giving those things energy. Just show up and do it. But
Yeah.
now let's zero in on the juicy stuff, the stuff that makes you nervous yet excited at the same time. right? This idea of taking back control of my time and creating spaciousness where I could invest in the relationships that matter most, my children, my husband, the people in our community. Now let that starts to become the material ingredients for us to write. And what I invite people to do is write five, up to five. It can be three, it can be two declarative statements about what you want in this part of your life. It's not more than five because brevity is key. The more you write, the less clear you are and the less action driving you are. But when you can get to that brevity, make it really concise, crisp, declarative, meaning you feel it in your veins, you would put an exclamation mark on it. I call it fuck yes clarity.
Yeah.
And that's what we're looking for in the business world, right? When everyone is feeling that fuck yes clarity about this is what we want the brand to be,
Yeah.
suddenly everyone sees all the ways they can contribute to it. And in your life brief, it's the same thing. When you get to fuck yes, clarity, let's take our time, take back our time. Now, when you wake up and you need a lens from which to look at your day, how are you going to spend your time? You're reminded of what is really important. And then that makes decisions easier when you're at a crossroads, easier. It kind of propels you into a new state of showing up.
So when you're writing your four declarative statements, do you suggest that you look at four different aspects of your life, your work, your personal, your community, or does it matter? It's really more of what's most
There
important.
are no rules, but
Yeah.
I find the sharper, the better. And so it's not one life brief. So my first life brief was really around our family and how do we spend our time. But since then, in the last 15 years, I've written briefs for my career, for my leadership, how I show up as a leader. I've written a parenting brief. I have a wealth brief, so my relationship with money, and what do we want to be wealthy in? And that brief is about being rich in relationship. If there could be one thing that we have true wealth in, it would be in the depth of connections and the relationships that we have. So it's about writing a brief for whatever is gripping you in your life right now. I have a self brief too, right? So this is not one brief and done. It's where do you want to write a brief? Where do you need more clarity in your life? And how do you want to go through this practice?
And then you talk about pushing it 3 times.
Because the first time is just to get it in the zone, just to write in a messy way your first draft, right?
Yeah.
And once you have your draft, that's your clay. You get to push it now. Now I want you to make it more honest. Where are you holding back? Where are you not allowing yourself to come fully forward about what you want?
Yeah.
The second push is how do you make it sharper, meaning more exacting, get more vivid with it, evocative, right? Describe it really. And then the third push is make it bolder, make yourself nervous because it shouldn't feel easy. It should be declarative and push you to a new space. My marriage brief is to fall madly in love with my husband again. After I wrote that after 17 years, 4 kids, 3 moves. The boldness in it was that the boldness and the sharpness was that I called it mad love.
So you
Now,
branded it. You branded your
yes,
each statement has its own branding so that you
right.
remember it, make it sticky. Is that what you mean?
Yes, it has to be tattooed. Otherwise, it's
Like
set
little
it, forget
little
it.
stickies that you have on your computer.
That's right. And mad love was a phrase that I couldn't forget. It was also terrifying for me at that time because it was the second time that we were probably inching towards that cliff's edge of separation.
Yeah.
And I didn't believe that mad love was possible between us. That's what made it bold. I could have said, oh, I want to get along, or oh, I want to co-parent, with ease and grace. Those would have been safer briefs. But in my heart of hearts, I wanted mad love. I was too young to not ever feel that fire of desire again. But it was really bold to write that down at a juncture in our relationship where I didn't feel that that was possible to rekindle that kind of feeling. But when I wrote it down, that was a declaration of, God damn it, I want that. I do. I want it. And the courage was in admitting that to myself, even with the possibility that I might not ever get it. And this is the exhilarating yet terrifying thing about writing the brief. And the spoiler alert is, when I declared it, I started making tiny new choices in how I showed up, showing him appreciation in the smallest, most tender, and sometimes passionate of ways that even surprised myself. And quite quickly, about maybe just 6 weeks later, we decided to go away for the weekend and have someone babysit, my mom babysit all our 4 kids, which is a tall ask for anyone. And we went away for 3 days. And by the third morning, I woke up before him and I was thinking and feeling these feelings stir inside me. And I thought, what is happening with me? Could this be mad love? And yeah, it was. So it was just interesting. It's interesting because declaration is an act of commitment. When you write, that's your first action. And when you write a declaration, that is a real seal of, yes, I want it. And when you've committed to yourself in that privacy, you start sparks start happening. You start to see, oh, hi. Thank you very much for that beautifully crafted cup of coffee that I usually just grab from your hands and walk out the door without acknowledging you at all. I'm just going to stop, look you in the eyes, and lean in for a kiss and say thank you before I walk out the door, get in the car, take the kids, drop them off, head to work. And those tiny acts just gave him permission to show up differently too. And that's what I find in all parts of our lives. When we choose and commit to showing up differently in the smallest of ways, it's an invitation for everyone else in our lives to show up differently in response.
So these are all the things that we learn in advertising, working in behavior change, right? And we
Exactly.
probably don't think about it in our own lives necessarily. We know how to do it for our clients, again, back to the brief, but intuitively, we've read all the books about behavior change. We know what we need to do to make it happen. And by making those changes within, that leads to your get active part. Are there any other get active strategies that you or tactics that you recommend to solidify this, other than the ones that you recommended, those small little changes of acknowledging where you are?
Well, we can't do it alone. So enlist people around you. Surround yourself by people who are going to keep you on the path, because doubt will reemerge. Those stories that we talked about at the beginning, the stories that were given to us, handed to us to protect us, they will reemerge and tell you, this is crazy. What? I Mad love? No way. You're crazy for thinking that you can revive this calcified, marriage or whatever it is, right? You can't change the company because the company doesn't want the change. We have all these stories about why we can't, and our clients have them too. And so our jobs in the client world is to give them the confidence and the bravery to make bigger bets. And in our lives, it's how do we surround ourselves with people who will encourage us when we're down, when the doubts creep in, to also help us commit to those bets in our own relationships.
I love that. Any other thoughts about getting active?
Oh gosh, there's so many. It's just, you don't have to make big leaps. Just know that life is a dance, and you can really change things in big ways in the tiniest slivers of action. You don't need wholesale change. You don't need to put everything up in your life in a garage sale. All you need to do is really get clear about how you can show up differently in 5-minute increments, but do it daily. Be consistent.
One of the things that you talked about that became part of your life brief was how important equity and diversity and inclusion is as part of you as a professional. And you had a wonderful story in the book that talked about how this came to fruition in work. Um, and would you mind telling that story and how it impacted you and how you were actually able to take part of your life brief that you had written down and manifest it in a real way at work?
Yes, and this brief is a lifelong one, because this is a big, big topic, and the world. I don't know that there's a finish line for this, but this came about in 2020 after the killing of George Floyd, and also the months later, the women in Atlanta, the Asian women in Atlanta, and it really forced me to look at my own identity and the stories I had been telling myself. And to cut to the chase, it was a reckoning of all the ways I had assimilated
Yeah.
since I was since I was in 8th grade, because I immigrated from Taiwan. I was really shy, bucktooth, brown girl in a sea of blonde and white, girls in Southern California. And I realized in 2020 how much of my life and my identity I had shed or suppressed in order to fit in. So as a kid, it was because I had this longing to just belong and not be the outsider. And then as a teenager, that really increased. And then as an adult, that was a path to success and achievement. And in 2020, I had to confront all the ways that I was supporting, excusing, defending a system that was not designed for me as a woman or as an immigrant woman. And I dug really deep about, well, now that I am a leader, I am at the top of my game. What is the thing that I want to bring to it? And that really circled around equity, diversity. And the brief was about relations, not just solutions, because I'm in a business of innovation, right? We're trying to come up with innovative ideas to solve big, complex problems for companies. But I realized that that also created an excuse for me not to get deeper into the relationships around me at work and in other parts of our lives, because I got to check the box and say, oh, look at that amazing campaign I did for gender inequality, or that college campus rape campaign we did that was so effective. It kind of made me say, yes, I'm doing it in the world, right? I could badge all the ways I was helping change the world, but that kept me at an arm's length from the relationships and the power as a leader inside the company, on the teams, or in the industry to change things that really needed to change. And so I had to examine how I show up as a leader in the smallest of ways, in the conversations, down to the meetings, um, even in writing the book and sharing some of these really vulnerable stories about work, admitting that I too have imposter syndrome. I too question, and I have cried at work as, that's a big taboo as a woman leader, right? Um, those were really scary acts, but I felt that the only way we could change is to talk about these things openly, name them so that we can shift them.
I think that's absolutely essential for what we're doing. So thank you for for sharing that with us. Um, How has the life brief changed you professionally? I mean, I understand how it has personally, but has it changed what you do professionally? Do you feel like the practice personally has honed what you're doing on the professional side? Is it easier for you to get to a key message now that you've kind of created these tools for yourself, how do you feel?
Well, the hard news is it's every project, problem, brand, or life situation is tricky. And so it's always daunting at the beginning. I always thought, oh gosh, it's going to be so easy 30 years in, but every problem has its own complexity and its own nuances. So its own puzzle. I don't know that that gets easier, but it is juicy. And I think how this work has expanded for me is at the agency, I still love getting deep into the essence of a company, right? And that clarity is more important than ever for companies right now because we are experiencing peak complexity.
Yes.
Their industries and categories are being disrupted all the time. Their audiences are fickle, they're not loyal. How do we get breakthrough, right? With our magic. And so I still run an accelerator at the agency called Brand Camp, and I love it. It's 6 weeks of intense getting to the essence, uncovering the story, and working with leaders to author that story for themselves. Because when they author it, they own it and they act on it. If I hand it to them, it's a different dynamic. So I really work with leaders to uncover it for their organizations, and it's really fun and it's sharp. It's exciting. And I have stepped to expand and lean into life strategy. And this actually, they fit together really well because when I work with leaders on their leadership briefs, it's how do you want to show up as a leader? Just like I had to examine and re-examine.
Yeah.
And are you clear about where you want your leadership to impact and influence, the influence and impact you want to have in the next 12 to 18 months, right? And when you put those two things together, when leaders are clear about how they lead and they're clear about what their brands um, stand for and how their brands need to show up in the world, it's a really potent intersection.
Oh, that's wonderful. I want to learn more about the brand camp. I think that sounds fantastic. And also, a lot of leaders are looking for that personal branding. How can you help me do personal branding? So that's an essential thing for offering that to your clients. I think that's really exciting. So if people want to learn more about you, obviously they can order the book, The Life Brief, on Amazon or any other platforms, but where can people go to learn more about you and connect with you?
Well, you can go to thelifebrief.com.
Hmm?
But really easy on social media. I'm on LinkedIn, Bonnie Wan, and then on Instagram, Bonnie Wan Official. And you can just email me too, Bonnie at
I'll put
thelifebrief.com.
it in the notes. Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today. I had a wonderful time picking your brain and learning more about the life brief, and I'm excited to finish my own.
Well, thank you for having me, Kelly. It's so juicy to be in conversation with you.
I appreciate it.